Hello, it's Brennan Wissinger again, and I have something to talk to you about. With the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I want to highlight police brutality and racial issues, racism in police, and police brutality and misconduct. George Floyd, as pretty much everyone knows, has died from officers, uh, officers, for officers leaning on his neck and crushing his windpipe, killing him. Breonna Taylor, who was an EMT, died when she was at her home, and police did a no-knock warrant on her home when they got the house wrong. Both of these acts are just a long line and a list of people that have been, of African Americans that have been killed by police. And I'm not saying this as, sure, that you say that sure, they're corrupt cops. I'm not arguing that they're not. But African Americans are 47% or 47% higher chance of getting killed by law enforcement than whites do. When someone who's African American gets pulled over by a cop, will be scared out of our minds. If we get pulled over, we're upset that we're probably getting a ticket, but we don't have to worry about dying. This is a systemic problem, and it's not just one issue. It's just not just police officers doing stuff wrong. The problem is there's no accountability, and the problem is that the system is set up so people not just the police system, but the economic system. And subsequently, since the economic system is set up that way, so is the political system, and so is the police. And since that is set up that way, that it results in people's deaths, and African Americans dying more. I'd like to have a moment of silence. Okay, so let's talk about this. First, what you say about these protests? What are they for? These protests are not are for trying to bring accountability measures, trying to bring measures in the police forces that will try to bring about change and make sure that this isn't a systemic problem. This is not a common problem in police forces. And I'm going to go into more detail of what's going on here, this discrimination and this brutality and stuff like that. And I'm asking people that are in protest. First off, the majority of these protests are peaceful. Second, do not loot, do not riot, and many of the looters and rioters are not even part of the protests. Some of them have even been connected to white supremacist groups. I want to make that clear. So, also, you say stuff about them. Some people say stuff like they'll get arrested. Well, Eric Gardner, who was an African American man who was killed by NYPD officers being choked to death after selling cigarettes, allegedly selling illegal cigarettes. Even though his death was ruled a homicide by the medical examiner, there were no indictments, and only one police officer out of the two that did this was fired. Only one. And this pattern continues. You see that and keep repeating itself in all these cases. It repeats itself and repeats itself and repeats itself. If you haven't noticed that, you just haven't been paying attention. And I've been paying attention. I follow the news very closely. I follow politics. Politics is my thing that I follow. So I follow that, like, I don't care about anything else except science and politics, basically. Don't even have much of a social life, really. So, you know, this is a problem that's been going on, and this continues. And let's put this in effect with George Floyd. 3 out of the 4 officers have not been arrested. The one that has been charged with it is charged with 3rd-degree murder and manslaughter, which basically they can claim he didn't do it intentionally, because they claim he didn't do it intentionally. He was there for 8 minutes after he was saying, "I can't breathe," "Officer, you're killing me." He was saying this, and they found him unresponsive at the scene after those 8 minutes and 42 seconds that he was on the ground. And when he was unresponsive or dead when paramedics arrived. He didn't get off of him at some point. He had sure enough time to get off of him. If he was doing this unintentionally, he had way more than enough time to get off of him and, get off of him and do that. Heck, they could have just put him in the car. Why didn't they do that? Nobody seems to know why they didn't do that, but my guess is this whole thing they thought he was a threat, even though, because I think every African American is a threat, apparently. And I'll explain why in a minute. And it's not African Americans' fault, it's white people's fault. And I'll explain that because of redlining and economic injustice. Explain that in a minute. And I'm saying this as I'm just saying the facts here, stating the facts here. Okay? It may sound like I'm saying stuff with races and stuff, I'm not trying to push this in any sense, I'm not trying to just, people say, well, race, that's not a big deal. Well, racism still continues. You think it just didn't end and then it just ended in the 1960s? People are still racist today. And even if you're not outrightly racist, saying, I want to kill African Americans, even if you're not outrightly like this, just look at how people associate. I'm even guilty of it. Like I was on I was in Upward Bound for a while. Well, I was in Upward Bound while I was in high school. So, Upward Bound is a program for low-income students to help them get into college. And during that, during the summer, they have a 6-week program. And the Upward Bound I was at, they brought in students from all around the state. And they were poorer communities, so many of them, if the majority of people that were there were not white, the majority of them were African American, Hispanic, and, it was very diverse. Actually, I would say there's a third white, a third Hispanic, and a third African American would be about the consistency almost. It was very diverse. But I can tell you the white people mostly hanged out in their own clique, including me. We all had normal relations. We were all good on good terms. We all were friends with each other. But we just didn't hang out with people that were different races very often. Sure, we did, and we didn't have a problem with it. But that's right there, that's aversive. Correct me if I'm wrong. Aversive racism. I'm not saying that I'm consciously making decisions to be racist. I'm subconsciously making those decisions, and everyone is guilty of it. Because of just how this has been gone through history so far, that, and what's been taught to us, just from everybody's actions. You don't have to be that old to realize this. You know, I've talked to elementary school kids, and elementary school kids start saying racist things. And I've had to try to correct them. This is all over the place. It's everywhere. It just didn't end in the 1960s. We like to pretend that it ended in the 1960s. We like to shove it in the back door and close the door. We like to shove it in the closet and close the door. But that's not the case. That it just didn't disappear. So anyways, back to this redlining thing. So under Roosevelt, yes, I'm going to condemn Roosevelt here. So I will condemn anybody and that I need to. And Roosevelt has done some terrible things. He's a good president, but he's also done some terrible things, like Japanese internment in this. So redlining was a policy to basically, on a map, they would draw red lines to exclude areas from areas that would be helped, and who got to live in these areas that wouldn't be economically helped. African Americans. So, because they were not allowed to live in areas that they were more better communities. They weren't allowed. And I want to, and that perpetuates itself. Remember, poverty continues itself, perpetuates itself. Okay. So, have you ever read the book There Are No Children Here? If you don't, I certainly recommend it. Go there and look for it, okay? Also, I'm going to include links at the bottom, like different organizations that, links in the, what do you call it? I'm new to this YouTubing thing. Whatever you call it. Links in the thing, you know what I'm talking about. The place where I put stuff. You know, the links to help, with, fundraising and that sort of thing. So, a lot of these communities that are African Americans, a lot of times they live in public housing. These public housing units are very run down. They're almost unfit to live in. I'm not talking about in my community, the public housing units, we do have public housing units in my community. I live in a small town, and we do have that. That's actually one of the reasons why my town has a good many people in it, is because of these two housing communities. But they're nice. But the ones that I'm talking about in the urban areas aren't that way. They're terrible. They're usually infested with rats. There's a lot of plumbing doesn't work. A lot of times, there's other problems with them. A lot of things are falling apart. It's just look up some New York City housing units. Look up some of them. Go look them up. Public housing, New York City public housing, and you'll see what I mean. I think. So, yeah. But I know a lot of these public housing units are bad. And so, back to what I was saying, it's not just that, it's just the community in general. And I keep getting off topic here, but for example, let's look at the education system. Look at the school system. In our schools, where do they get their money? They get their money from property taxes. Local community, property taxes. School taxes. They get their community from the locality that they exist in. They don't get their money from a higher source, a more broad source. So that means if your community is poor, your school is going to have less advantages. You know what makes you able to climb out of poverty? Education. You just killed them being able to get out of poverty. See what I mean here? And that isn't the end of it. That's not a quarter of it. So, so let's remember, if you're poverty, but places that have more poverty have higher crime rates because people are desperate. They don't then they might steal stuff, or they want to get their minds off of what's going on, so they use drugs and stuff like that. It's you know so and because these schools are poor, it makes harder for kids to try to get money for college and try to move out, or technical school. And because of, you know and the stress that goes on with financially, and the crime and stuff, that puts stress on family structures, which perpetuates more crime, and it perpetuates more poverty. And then well, high crime levels and low opportunity, because you don't have very much money to begin with, so you don't have nice looking areas, you don't have like as much good, and that sort of means manufacturing and other businesses like that don't want to put themselves there. At least that are decent. The only type of businesses that want to put themselves there are businesses like industry, like coal-fired power plants. Stuff that wants to be in a bad area that nobody else wants to put in their community, and everybody else will fight against and make sure it doesn't go in their community. But they don't have the power or the money, the influence to do so. And then that's environmental justice, by the way. So, and climate justice and racial justice go together. Both of them are issues that they're tied, are interconnected. And so, and also, when you have less income, there's less income in the community. That means service and retail businesses don't want to go there, because no one's going to buy their service or buy their products. And because there's so little businesses, people can't get a job. Not to mention, it's already harder for African Americans to get a job because of this people being racist, but they don't, this modern racism thing where people are racist, but they don't want to admit to themselves that don't want to admit to themselves, and they certainly won't admit it to others that they're actually racist. That's another thing. And it's also important to know that that even goes for like implicit bias, where you don't, it's subconscious. Not that you just won't admit it, but it's completely subconscious. That might also play a factor in unemployment, or with employment. You know, African Americans are much less. What a person with white credentials that's completely the same as African Americans is more likely to get the job than someone that's African American. And also, you know, and because of this, poverty leads to more, and then they can't. This reverberates itself. Poverty creates more poverty. And poverty creates crime, which creates more poverty, which creates crime. Which poverty creates more poverty, which creates poverty, which creates poverty. And this perpetuates itself. These people can't just work their way out of the system like people like to fantasize they can. Not that these people can be convinced. No, I don't know if many of these people can't be convinced, but I'm just pointing that out. And so this is the problem. So, and what the police have responded to these protests is terrible. I know there's been riots and stuff, but the majority of these protests are peaceful, and these things are doing. Most of these things are dealing with peaceful protests, and they're responding in a heavy-handed manner because I think they're afraid of this. What we're trying to change the status quo. They're afraid of that, and they're also the computer is not working well today. They're afraid of changing the status quo. They're afraid of changing the status quo that might hurt them. And I'm not talking about all of these are bad cops. But from what we're getting from all this stuff, it seems like there's a heck of a lot of them. And I have to admit it, from what I've been seeing everywhere, it seems like there's a heck of a lot of them that, like, 20% that are bad, and then a majority of the rest of them just won't do those brutality things by themselves, but won't do it themselves, but they're responding and they won't do it themselves, but they won't stand up when something does go wrong. I've only seen one video, and we've seen a bunch of them, of things that, like, we've seen a bunch of these videos. I've only seen one that I can ever remember video of police brutality, with another police officer stood up for them. And I can see I've seen a lot of police, but most of them have another person with them. There's only one, and that was a woman police officer. And this is coming from someone that watches police shows and stuff like that. I find that interesting. I'm willing to call the police as someone that like, that's because of my white privilege, that I'm not, white privilege, because when people say white privilege, they mean because African Americans don't have that. They don't get to call the police, for example, without feeling in fear. They don't get to interact with the police without feeling in fear. They don't get to they don't get they don't like, income wise, they're 90%. The whites are 90% have more 90% more income than African Americans do on average. That's a huge difference. Huge. And what we've been seeing, like, I've seen, and this is not to say that we've had hundreds of police officers die from all this stuff, at least to their numbers, which I'm going to believe in some sources, but not all of them. Like, for example, in Pittsburgh, I have a friend that was protesting at one of these protests. It was tear gas, and this was completely peaceful, and I saw videos of it proving it's peaceful. I thought, I don't believe her. But the police, it was before curfew, and the police just acted on it, or just tear gassed them. Right now, I think the police are scared. Police are scared. Now, I'm not saying we don't like all of you, but you should prove to us, you need to prove to us, and I'm not talking about, you need to find a way to prove to us that you're doing a good job. You need to stop with tear gassing and hurting people like this, and rubber bullets and all this stuff on peaceful protesters. You need to stop. Go catch the rioters and focus on them. Don't worry about these peaceful protesters. Don't worry about them. If you do that, I'm not talking about you taking a knee and stuff like that. Because sure, I think some of these cases of taking a knee seem to be for PR, seem to be to try to make... But, that said, de-escalation is a great thing, and it's de-escalating the situation. It's part of de-escalating. And that's a good thing. But some of these seem to be using for PR and stuff like that when they're not actually honest. Because we've seen New York and Los Angeles take a knee with them and then later tear gas them. The same group of protesters, the same group of cops. This is something, like, we've seen, and I think the police are scared, and they're having basically a nationwide hernia. Police in Cincinnati took down the American flag off their station and put up the blue line flag. If you don't know what that is, because you're not in the U.S. or whatever, look it up. Or you just don't know what that is in general, just look it up. Sorry. But, they took the flag down and replaced it with something that was just supporting law enforcement. We're not all against you. We're against the bad people in you. We're against the system that is perpetuating this problem. We're against the police officers that have all voted in police unions to try and limit how many, for example, limit the, like, and make it so police disciplinary files can't be accessed, or make it so police people people investigators can't question police for 24 hours after they've killed somebody. That's what we're talking about as a problem. And not just that, I'm getting to that in a minute. But we've seen in Minneapolis, in Los Angeles, and Louisville, we've seen police cars running into protesters. And we've seen in Philadelphia police running over people with bicycles. I think we've seen that in D.C. too. And then fact check me on this, because this is just going off of memory. Because police arresting reporters in New York City and Minneapolis. Police are firing tear gas at protesters before warning them in New York. Police firing tear gas at peaceful protesters before finishing their warning in Pittsburgh. As I said, I have a friend who was there, and it was before curfew, and that whole thing was completely legal. And among other problems, nobody knows why they did that. Why they declared it an unlawful assembly. And then they claim later that they were looting and stuff. That if you look at the video, there was none of that, and there's two videos, and both of them were at different vantage points, and you could basically see the whole thing, and I didn't see a single person smash a window. Police in New York City, Louisville, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Atlanta, D.C., and other cities throwing people or other things of brutality. Like, just one police officer in New York threw a woman about, I don't know, it was over like 10 feet. She was pregnant, and she killed the baby. He killed the baby. Police in Minneapolis and New York City arresting reporters. Well, I already said that, didn't I? Police in Los Angeles and New York City taking a knee with protesters, and later using tear gas on the same protesters. I think this also happened in Seattle. Police somewhere, I forget where, arresting the wrong person for looting. Police in Seattle pepper spraying a freaking child. Police in Seattle firing fireworks at a reporter that was not 10 feet away. Police in Louisville firing live rounds on the protesters. By live rounds, I mean live ammunition, not rubber bullets. Police in Philadelphia firing tear gas into a group of huddled protesters that were caught between a wall and police. Basically, these were people that were close in together. There was no room. Police in Minneapolis doing a drive-by pepper spray on peaceful protesters. Police firing at people on their porch in Minneapolis. Police arresting peaceful protesters after they had gone home in D.C. State police without name tags, and Philadelphia police without badges or name tags in Philadelphia, Seattle, and D.C. Police firing rubber bullets at a woman's face using sniper rifles in San Diego. And some of these probably have had deaths. I'm not saying that all police are bad here, but that giant list seems to point that this is a bigger problem. And all of these rules, police union contract rules, they create them. The officers are the ones who create them. Seem to point that these officers aren't doing their jobs correctly. And one of the biggest problems is you see police officers, like law enforcement officers, for example, first of all, law enforcement officer is a new term. You should reserve that for the FBI and agencies that don't do patrolling. As a police officer, your job is to protect and serve. The reason why you enforce the law to protect people. If you're not enforcing it in a manner that protects people, then you're not doing your job. Another thing. I forget what I was going to say. You know, police that's doing this type of thing, the police that's doing this type of thing, you know, this is a systematic, like, the police, you know, another, police that are, they police, like, a lot of these posts, like, you see different places about law enforcement officers, police officers, they say they're warriors. You're not warriors. You're guardians. You're not a warrior. Your job is not to win wars. Your job is to protect people. That's your job. If you're a warrior, you shouldn't be in the police. If you think you're a warrior, you should get out of the police and go join the military. Because that's not your job. Heck, in modern days, you might not even want to join the military. Get your anger out of a punching bag and go fire guns at a gun range. Go do that. Or take bullet practice in your backyard on cutouts. Don't go out there and do that if you think you're a warrior, because you're not. You're a guardian. Your job is to protect people. And it's bad for police officers, the rest of them that are good. But honestly, what it's looking right now is about 20% is bad. I want to say it looks like 20% is bad. The others are complacent and not willing to do anything, or complicit and not willing to do anything, and someone will be dying, and then 10% are good. I hope I don't want to believe that, but that's what it's looking to be true. That's how bad the system is at this point. Your job is to handle a lot of stress, okay? Yes, job is to handle stress, but that's your job. When you signed up for that job, that's what you signed on for. And this is a systematic problem, and what Trump's done is just made this worse. And I'm going to send another video out tomorrow about this, because that's really important. But I also want to talk about what can we do to get this stopped. What can we do to stop that? And I think I'm going to have to make another video. So I'm going to put stuff at the bottom with different organizations with police brutality, or trying to stop police brutality. And I'm going to do another video. Thank you for watching. See you next time.